Hey guys, this is Vid, and today we're going to be doing some replay review in Pioneer with Mono Green Stompy. This is not my replay, this is a friend of mine, and he's getting prepped for the Pro Tour, and we are going to review his gameplay and look at some alternative decisions and learn. Reviewing replays is a very excellent way to improve your game in general, and I highly recommend it for anyone trying to up their game. So this is a full league. We're going to be skipping through some of the games though to pick out some things. The first match was against Is It and Soul. It was a very clean-cut match. I think the decisions were all quite strong. And I'm going to move on to the second game where I feel like a lot more can be learned. So we start with this opening hand. It's got a nice curve. We have several 1-drops. We have a 2-drop, and we can play a turn 2 Steel Leaf as a pretty powerful opener. I like it a lot. And he does keep it. Opponent's on the draw, and the first thing that happens, go ahead and stop here, is opponent shocks a Blood Crypt. The first thing you should be thinking in Pioneer when your opponent shocks a Blood Crypt is, oh, Thoughtseize. But opponent passes the turn, meaning it's not a Thoughtseize, meaning it has to be one of two other cards. There's only one reason your opponent would shock a Blood Crypt and then pass turn. It's because they're holding up the card Wild Slash or Fatal Push. Usually Fatal Push, but it could be Wild Slash. Either way, it's a card that's either going to your face or it's going to kill your 1-drop. So if we only had an Elvish Mystic to play here turn 1, I would go ahead and play it every time. But because we have 2 Elvish Mystics and we also have this 1-mana equipment, I think actually the better play here is to play the equipment first. Not because it's going to stop your opponent from fatal pushing your card next turn, but it's going to waste the tempo that your opponent is trying to gain here. They lose a mana, they shocked for no reason, and they won't get to use their mana efficiently. They might Wild Slash your face if Wild Slash is the card, but you'd much rather take that 2 than have your Elvish Mystic die. So instead you could play, because what's going to happen most of the time is you're going to play your land here, you play your Elvish Mystic dies, the next turn you do either like Elvish Mystic or Burning Tree. You have a few options there. But instead you could play your equipment turn 1, opponent loses their first turn basically, and then next turn you can drop both the Elvish Mystics to guarantee get your mana on the next turn. I like this line a little bit more than what my friend chooses here. He goes ahead and opts for the Elvish Mystic, and of course it's pushed. Which isn't the end of the world, it's a 1-for-1 trade. I do think we could have gained a little bit more mana advantage here. Now we choose between Burning Tree, Elvish Mystic Shadow, or just playing the Elvish Mystic in the Shadow, but he goes ahead and goes with the stronger play, I believe. Here we're able to choose between Scavenging Ooze and equip Shadow Spear, or we can play Steel Leaf. What my friend does here is he plays the Steel Leaf and then he passes. He takes the damage from his Hashep Oasis and decides to hold up the Aspect of the Hydra as protection on the Elvish Mystic. Now this is a lesson I've learned from Infect, and what I think it is, as a general rule, if you're not going to attack the creatures, which as we can see here, he doesn't attack with the Elvish Mystic, using the Hashep Oasis and relying on this Mystic to hold up the mana for Aspect of the Hydra, it gives your opponent a lot more control. They could Wild Slash your Elvish Mystic at the end of turn here, and then do like a 4 damage board wipe next turn and clear the board. What you could do instead is, since you're not attacking with the Elvish Mystic, you could tap the Elvish Mystic to play the Steel Leaf and leave the Hashep Oasis open to cast the Aspect of the Hydra. That also gives you an extra point of life to play with. Ultimately, it doesn't matter too much in this match, but it's a good habit to get into, is I think just using your mana creatures before using your lands, unless you have a very specific reason not to. And this situation, I think, is one where you probably would prefer to use the creature over the land. It gives your opponent less power over your decisions. And it also saves you a life point. So we'll keep moving. Opponent does a Swift in on the Steel Leaf Champion and plays a tap land, passes turn. Doesn't play the Murder Strider, so we know for a fact he's holding up some kind of interaction. And my friend equips the Shadow Spear and plays the Knight. Another option would be to play the Knight and play a Scavenging Ooze and not equip the Spear. It's hard to say whether that's the stronger play or not, though. I can't say for sure that's a stronger play, but it's definitely one that should be considered. Equipping the Shadow Spear plays better against board wipes, which is a completely reasonable thing to do. Opponent Thoughtseizes the Scavenging Ooze, Kolaghan's commands the board away, and puts our friend here in a pretty tight spot. So here our friend uses the Aspect of the Hydra for value, he says in the commentary, and I don't necessarily like this very much. I think when you're using a pump spell like this and you have plenty of mana and no cards in hand, it's better to hold it back for either it killing your opponent or for creating a trade. I think here it was kind of wasted. It doesn't end up mattering in this match, but I don't think that's a very good habit to get into, and it can put you in bad spots. You see here already, and again, it doesn't end up mattering too much, but you could have been able to save the aspect of the Hydra and use it to make a trade here with the Murderous Rider, or to preserve your creatures against damage-based attacks here after he plays Ronus and passes. He could still have this aspect in his hand, and it would be doing him a lot more service. So opponent attacks with the Murderous Rider, indicating he's going to be wiping the board, and I believe that's exactly what he does. He does an Anger of the Gods, which again, if he had the aspect there, he could have preserved one of his creatures so that he could just pump it with his Ronus and stay on the offensive even if he just top decks a land. Fortunately, our friend top decks a Lovestruck Beast, and he's able to push through the win with the Ronus. So just a few differences I would make in gameplay last game to optimize our gameplay. Those decisions ended up not mattering in this game, and we still won. However, I think they're very good habits to get into when you're trying to play a lot of games over time and maintain a high win rate. Sides out his aspects of the Hydras and brings in Shaper's Sanctuary, Lifecrafter's Bestiary, and I believe another card draw engine. So nice sideboarding there. I do approve of this decision. Friend opens with a quite straw hand. A turn 1 Shaper's Sanctuary behind these creatures is really, really nice. Against our opponent, who we know is running things like Fatal Push and Swift End and plenty of targeted removal. So leading on the Shaper Sanctuary is a strong choice. Opponent plays a Blast Zone. This gives us reason to hold back our 1-drops a little bit. And I think our friend does a good decision here in not playing the double Llanowar Elves, instead playing the Lovestruck Beasts and the Llanowar Elves. Or Heart's Desire, rather. I think it's a nice play, and it's good to remain cognizant of that Blast Zone. So here you can play the Steel Leaf or the Llanowar Elves or the Lovestruck Beast. And I think it's the correct decision here to go ahead and play the Lovestruck Beast. It's the card your opponent already knows about. They don't know about the Steel Leaf, and it's good to keep your Llanowar Elves in your hand at this point, as the mana ramp doesn't do much for you, and this Blast Zone makes it easy for your opponent to get a 2-for-1. So strong choices here. And then Steel Leaf Champion, Llanowar Elves. In this situation, I probably would continue holding Llanowar Elves. The 1/1 body isn't super valuable on this board state, especially when you know your opponent's running a bunch of board wipe. Opponent does tick up the Blast Zone to 2, which is a little unusual. You would think you'd just pop it on 1 to deal with the Llanowar Elves and Shaper Sanctuary. That's just kind of a misplay, I think. But against a better opponent, I would think they would typically leave this Blast Zone on 1, and it would make this Llanowar Elves play a lot worse. Fortunately, our opponent doesn't take advantage of this potential 2-for-1 because he's scared of dying to the Steel Leaf Champion. However, I do think it'd be a better idea to hold on to this Llanowar Elves for other synergies like the Great Hinge, or to follow up after a board wipe, just as a way of having pressure, since the extra mana doesn't do too much. We get a Kiora, which is not useful at the moment, but it can become useful quite quickly. Attack with everything, passes. Opponent is probably going to take up their Blast Zone, I would guess. So good reason to not play the Kiora. I believe that's why he didn't play the Kiora there. Opponent does a really bad Collective Brutality followed by a board wipe. That shows how holding the Llanowar Elves would have been probably a little bit better, but ultimately it doesn't end up mattering too much. It's just something you probably want to put more thought into in general. So now the developing of the Kiora into the Heart's Desire, into the Lovestruck Beast. Pretty powerful rebuild. Blast Zone takes care of some of the 3-drops, but getting the Lifecrafter's Bestiary right off the bat is a really nice way to refresh. Opponent cycles a land, plays a Murderous Rider, shows he's getting low on resources. So with the Lifecrafter's Bestiary online, it's pretty trivial to win from here. As we can see, we're just going to slowly draw cards, get ahead, and I think the game's pretty much over at this point. I hope this video has been helpful to you, my friend Johnny89, and also those of you watching. Please feel free to submit more replays in the future. I'd be happy to go over them. And it's not only a great way for the player to learn, but it's also a great way for us to learn and myself to learn just by watching, not being in the moment having to make the decisions, but in just reviewing and reevaluating the decisions. It's a lot easier when you're not in the moment.